hermit. I know. There was once an evolving planet on which the creatures, as they became predominantly mentally driven, would fall into a deep, dark hole. A deep, dark hole in their own head. And the further down they fell, the less awareness they had thereof, and could ultimately reach a depth at which they completely forgot that they had ever fallen. And thus, thanks in part, did their growth continue. Those who criticize aspects of man's collective, continuing foolishness are themselves the foolish, in that they are totally behind the times and not realizing that the perceived foolishness is now the norm. In that mental land, unique to man, just because 2 plus 2 does not equal 5, does not mean it never can. The reason that man's mind is able to overcome his biological instincts is due to its flexibility. Thus, on the larger screen, do the civilized ultimately overcome the uncivilized, and the more complex the simple, who are always less pliant. And any man who does not individually make use of this knowledge is himself a singular-styled fool. If you still have any doubts regarding life-generated thought's ability, if not inclination, to assist in your efforts to rein in and extend your individual consciousness, just consider how, whenever they have a choice, thoughts will consistently latch on to pictures of man in demeaning and inhumane situations as opposed to any alternative. And those of you on the fast track might care to ponder over the fact that, given its own head, the mind never seems to see alternative scenes to man's aggressive activities. It's enough, noted one man, to make you wonder who your friends are. But not enough, note I, to cause a man interested in walking to fret over an absence of crutches. In a manner similar to my updating of an old dictum to now read, "Life helps those who help it," expand the instant subject thusly. Consciousness is assisted only by aid applied directly to consciousness. "'Tis always good," noted one better trackside, "to be able to narrow down the field." Words worthy as a motto for the mentally more alert. Another reason that it can seem so difficult and slippery to get your hands directly on techniques pertinent to the aim of such as this is reflected in what has long been noted by those with success therein, that you should not tell anyone about a method that works for you until it has stopped doing so. Ordinary minds can never comprehend that secret knowledge is not such merely for the sake of secrecy or for any other predictable reason, but rather that certain discoveries made by certain people they keep to themselves to preserve as long as possible the ephemeral helpfulness of the discovery. And 'tis only after they have discarded it does it fall into the publicly known domain. This in no wise should discourage a perceptive man, but rather should spur him on in the necessary and pleasurable effort to make his own useful discoveries. If it is not practical, profitable, and doable, it is not mystical. Another difference between life-induced thought and self-driven consciousness. Thought will tolerate, nay, thrive on and wallow in, the infinite riding of a merry-go-round, while stabilized consciousness, once experienced, will evidence an attitude toward such activity in terms not suitable to quote in a public forum. Suffice it to say that whatever be said is always sufficient to consciousness. Sufficient being the operationally humorous word here. Though it makes no sense at all at the normal level, a fact is that one of the necessities for man's collective development is a bad memory. The unrecorded history of the transcendental struggle shows that there has always been the two approaches to any attempted organized activity pertinent thereto. One being the establishment of schools and orders that were apparently exclusive in nature, that is, who allowed in only those who were specifically interested in such activity, while the second version was all-inclusive in that they made no distinction in who they allowed to participate, much like what occurs within the thinking of those individuals actively involved in the struggle. The admonishment to turn none from your door speaks to the perceptive not about hospitality, but about the need for either mental discrimination or a total lack thereof. Bottom line, given a choice, the mind will always think. And thus lead one to nowhere in particular. Just where? Utilizing dramatic sarcasm, the perceptive want to go. As per myth, two knights once rode out to confront one another on the field of battle. One carried a dictionary and the other a Bible. As they prepared to charge, they peered across the field intently at each other. And then, before they could ever make their first move, they both began to laugh, wondering what in the hell they thought they were doing. And by the way, the impresario who had staged the affair did not find this turn of events at all humorous. Want to guess who it was? I'm going to guess. It's almost impossible to be wrong. A man said to local conditions, "Hey, ease up. I'm blind, not deaf." And Laugh replied, "Oh yeah, you are. You just haven't noticed." And once again, it just goes to show. And yet another version of that old Genesis story says that God threw Adam out of the garden because he wouldn't turn his radio down. And yeah, I know, I left a lot of the details and setups out of the story, but I figured that by now, most of you could get it anyway. You know, such things as it was the big guy who gave him a radio in the first place and like that. Question. What can be expected of a stilt walker whose mental intentions are not in sync with the stilts? Answer. Why, everything, of course. Same as everyone else operating at ground level. And now once again, tonight's reminder of that same old song. If you do not realize that life itself is alive, with its own goals and methods of moving there toward, nothing about life will ever make sense. As in other closed-in hierarchies, in its natural domain, the mind rules supreme. With collective man, this is both proper and beneficial, while a few individuals find the situation curiously interesting and open to change. To prove this very point in his own unique way, one man, in lieu of growing a mustache, would, each morning while shaving, cut himself someplace under the nose, then, to stop the bleeding, would affix a piece of toilet tissue thereto and wear throughout the day. Tell your mind to supreme on that one. Any would-be warrior expecting to survive long enough to ever experience any of the joys of battle must soon realize that no victories are to ever be expected fighting a foe on his home turf. Our inspirational thought for the day. in that great mystical quest to scratch that mental itch before the wearing down the body does it for you. When you finally reach the place of realizing that the everyday runnings of life are not your foe, you soon after begin to see that neither are things arranged in life as to be directly supportive of your endeavor. And while my specific descriptions of the extremes lack literal validity, the fact remains that you must find somewhere in between the two a place of unaligned dispassion from which to mount your exposition. A man who takes life personally takes nothing with him when he goes. And everyone does go. It's just a question of whether or not you individually participate in the journey. In case anyone was actually listening, I mispronounced the word and changed part of the meaning of the next to last sentence. But giving you credit for some intellectual wherewithal, I won't even bother to go back and do whatever you do when you go back. The reason that metaphors, allegory, and symbolism are necessary with man's mind is that you cannot explain the nature of dirt to the lower 40. In his thoughts, one man said, to his thoughts, one man said, don't tell me that life is unfair unless you can prove it. Since the subject of memory has arisen several times tonight, be clear about one thing pertinent there too. The body's memory in an ordinary man, though silent and subtle, is operationally faultless, while the mind's, though verbal and specific, cannot be infinitely relied upon, which is part of the basis of its functional vitality. The DI of one platoon of mystical recruits one day told them, if you try to tell someone about the nature of life and take too much into consideration the nature of the ones you're speaking to, or take them too little into consideration, you will fail in your attempt. And one of the troops raised the hand and the point. Since you covered both possibilities, then how can you avoid failing in such an effort? Oh, you can't, the sergeant replied. Smoke if you got 'em, but don't flame out prematurely. The chopping ups pertinent to personal preference in the mental backyard. Those who have an axe to grind ultimately find that they in fact have no axe. Looked at another way, this is how thought can so readily cut whatever it touches while lacking pertinent adhesive capacity. The only way that the metaphor of Istanbul as representing the individual state of consciousness makes sense is after you have literally been there. Put that in your theoretical pipe and gag on it. Tonight's mental health news. A man on a journey doesn't have to worry about anyone else driving him crazy. As a man begins to get personal peeks at what life is actually about, he at first doesn't know whether to laugh or to be shocked. But it soon all works itself out. 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 Hint, you know that you're making some progress when you get to a place where you can think better and faster alone than you can with anyone else's help. In fact, let us be even more precise. Those who understand what the journey is about, past a certain point in their travels, understand that the true purpose of a so-called teacher's teaching is to make you think, not to make you think like he does. Okay, from still a final view. Past a certain place, any planning is too much planning. having a perceived proper direction is not necessary for ordinary minds, and is only so for the few individually intent on non-collective travel. And even then, it's difficult and tricky to describe. So, why bother? A man asked a mystic, okay, look here. Just what is the benefit in controlling your awareness, like you people keep talking about, other than you people wanting to do it? A question still, of course, for which there is no answer. Hip, hip. A final, or at least another use of my last picturization of a closed environment, in this case of the seas, and the hierarchy, the so-called physical food chain, coming all the way from the smallest little plankton to little pikes and little salmon on up to gropers, or for those of you of less erotic inclinations, grouper, then up to the king of the sea, the shark, and keeping in mind that within the context of what we're talking about, just referring to that in isolation, there is nothing that can be done in any manner to affect this food chain. That is, none of the lower creatures on the chain can do anything. It is not within their ability to do anything that will affect the fact of the shark being the ultimate eater. But then, that was the first stage, as I was calling it, and the second stage, in the use of my little parable or allegory, would be to stick in man in this scene and point out to you that in this scene, and others that I could come up with, they're not that obscure, but within this scene, man has the ability to interfere in what would appear to be, to most people, I guess they could call it unnaturally interfere, at least unexpectedly interfere with this food chain. That is, man can overcome a shark. Man can place himself in this food chain above that which is the natural top of the chain, but only by getting the top of the chain at least partially out of its natural environment. That is, that a man cannot jump in the water unassisted, obviously, with any pieces of technology like a bazooka or a 9mm. He cannot jump in the water and through his own dexterity, through his own strength in that environment overcome a shark. It is only by him being able to get the shark at least partially out of the shark's environment that he can, in a sense, upset this chain and overcome the shark. See, he starts out outside the natural system itself. We are not naturally aquatic creatures, but man can, as it were, literally and figuratively, stick his hand into an environment that is foreign to him, and within that environment, overcome the head of its food chain. But he has got to get said head partially out of its natural environment. You have got to drag the shark at least partially out of the water enough for it to suffocate. That was the second stage, and then, or the first metaphorical stage. And then I point out that you could also let the water line be the level of intelligence inside of a man's head, the level of consciousness, I should say, and that eternal, usefully ad hoc, though imprecise, division of man into his mind and into his body, and that this would represent, collectively, of course, this would be civilization, all of man's humanistic, civil, decent, collective, social aspects, which come only from the mind. Well, he certainly has them at the lower level, but they're almost exclusively having to do with sticking it in somebody and having an orgasm. The collective, the social life of man springs. It only comes about when a man has a functioning intellect and functioning to the point that his mind can, in a sense, drag his shark, which would be everything at the biosurvival level, to be able to at least partially drag it up and in some way interfere with it. That even in man, the shark, his body, his biosurvival instincts are comparable to a shark, and that they are the head of the domain down there. There is no morality, there is no decency, there is no Christian charity, there is no Jewish compassion, there is nothing down here except survival. Might as well be a shark. It has the same sort of compassion, gentility, artistic appreciation, just all the social graces man's body has to the same degree that your average shark does. So for man to be civil, for a man's intellect to operate at such a level as to be of any value to him, it has got to be able, in a sense, to pull the shark partially out of the water. That is what civilization is. That is what an ordinary civilized man, or the behavior of a civilized man on a collective level and individually, for a man to be civilized, educated, sophisticated. He has, to some degree, mentally, has to have the ability to pull the shark above the level of consciousness so that he can, where appropriate, as dictated by life, that where appropriate he can pull out the biosurvival instincts, at least up in a de facto manner, as need be. He can pull them up and overcome them. That a man can refrain from attacking a woman walking down the street when he's sexually aroused by her on the basis, just to put it obviously and crudely, that his mind knows that's not the thing to do. That is not proper. We do not do that sort of thing here. And if he's civilized, he goes along with it, more or less. The other stage that I hit at last time, and I still did not make it transparently clear enough to suit my intentions, is this. Now, far beyond any idea of being civilized, being educated, sophisticated, anything as dictated by life, the attempt to do whatever this kind of stuff is, the struggle for enlightenment, the awakening of consciousness, the liberation of the mind, etc. What is involved there is that men, without using such a description, now forget, we can use this same one, but the whole symbolism of it now is inside of one's man's head. If this was his head, if this is the mind, the brain, then inside the brain is we have still another little picture of a man and a level of consciousness inside the mind. Just this writ smaller and stuck inside my one drawing. What people are attempting to do is then what it was the biosurvival instincts of man, or what was the shark over here, is represented by life generated thinking. And I can only assume rhetorically that everyone has some idea that what you think, just what normally passes through your mind without any other comment, just what you think of, what would qualify in everyone else's mind and to you as being your thoughts. You have not even a clue. You don't even have a suspicion about what life's about unless you understand, unless you know by now that it has benefited you naught. Insofar as this sort of thing, that thought in no wise ever makes a man more conscious, more understanding of life. It will not reveal the truth about life. It simply will not. And it can take a long time. Some people can live a whole life believing they're involved in such as this and never understand it. I know that. But as long as you think in some way that what passes through your mind, just thought, and you can't stop, we're not going to debate it, or you say, well, some thought is good, some of it's a waste of time. The kind of thoughts I have that are far removed from any sort of transcendental activity, certainly they're useless, but how about when I'm thinking about such as this? There can be no discrimination in the barnyard. That's why there is no such. That which thought touches, it can easily cleave, which is a dangerous word because it means both. It cuts all that it touches, but the mind, thought, lacks the ability, the capacity for adhesiveness. All right? I'll redo a bit of the Western marriage ceremony I just thought. He would be a mystic intoning over a man's head. That which thought has cleaved can never be put back together. The interesting word aspect about cleave, that's the way off the subject, is it means both throughout the last several hundred years. It means cut apart and it means put together. So it could be, let that which thought has cleaved, let thought again cleave. When thought dismantles something, that is its nature, because you never thought about it. I know that from another view you can say that the mind is in charge of invention of technology and etc., yes. But the only way that it conceives of technology is by cutting up. It is the old idea that's non-understood that there continually been ordinary people making criticism of the mental activities of life, saying that the whole thing about being an intellectual or being a professional or an expert is that they know more and more about less and less, that they keep cutting the field down smaller and smaller and smaller. Yeah, but they don't understand the basis of the criticism. That the mind must be able to separate. It must be able to cut up life into smaller and smaller chunks to even develop technology. I know at first you could think, well, it takes it takes an expansive mind to come up with an idea of the silicone chip or how to do so-and-so or the internal combustion engine or the principles of flight. No. It's that the mind looks out and starts out seeing things on a grander scale, which is how you start out before you fell in the hole. Before man became a thinking creature, you simply took in whatever was pertinent in life. There was no discrimination. There was no cutting up of what you saw. But once the mind starts, for it to be useful, it does not operate in an expansive manner. It cuts things smaller and smaller and smaller. Not that smallness is the point, but after life has cut, I can make you up another version on the spot of the creation story. Is as soon as Adam got thrown out, for whatever reason, I won't make up yet another one, but as soon as he got thrown out, the first thing happened when he stepped outside the gate of the garden, that is the old silent bowel level of existence. As soon as he stepped outside and the mind started, that he was then oriented by the mind more so than the body, the first thing the mind did, because he had never done it up until now, the garden was simply the garden. It was the garden. But as soon as he stepped outside the garden, the silent initial realm of pre-mental cognition of man, once he stepped outside, he no longer saw a garden. He did not see the earth. He saw north and south. He looked at it and he said, well, hey, here I am outside the garden. Here I am on earth. Oh, and there's the west side and there's the east side. He saw it immediately cut into two parts. For it to progress past that point, for him to do the first thing, let's say the first thing he decided was he needed a compass. Because for the first time, there seemed to be two directions. Whereas in the garden, it was all-encompassing. It was closed in like everything else, except he had more awareness of its limitations. But once outside, and once the mind began to operate, the first thing he realized was, hey, there's an up and a down, a north and a south, the east side and the west side, nice section of town, bad section of town. Let's say the first thing he needed was a compass. All right, to do that, he had to then cut it up again to do the first thing. The only reason I stopped there, in case you missed it, was that smallness is not the point when I say that the mind must continually cut things into smaller and smaller pieces. Said smallness is not the point. It simply is, to whatever degree a certain area has already been cut collectively, however it's been cut is what men collectively take to be the reality of some situation. The potentials of flight, the uses of internal combustion engines before the Wright brothers got it off the ground. Once one area has seemed to become stabilized in people's minds collectively in that time and in that place, take that to be an operational statement of things as they are, for them to go further, somebody must come along and to cut it up again into a smaller part. Not that it's better or worse, but it must be continually cut smaller and smaller for things to give the appearance of external progression. Back to this. you have not any suspicion about what's going on, as long as you as long as you accept the fact, as long as you believe without any analyzation, but that the mind in some way is going to bring about a cohesive comprehension as to what life's about. Put it simple again. Let's say it's a kind of potential conflict, and it's only potential. It is not natural. It is not required. But natural, I mean, it's not native to everyone. They do not even have a sensation of this kind of conflict. But it is a potential conflict between life-generated thought, which is everything that normally takes place in any human being, internally, at the non-bowel survival level, the mental level. It is life-generated. That is one reason also, in case you never thought about it, that education is given the theoretical preeminence that it is when there's absolutely no evidence, none, never has been, none, no evidence that it produces the results not only desired but expected. It's just another example. As we was also talking about recently, but the gap between what men say is true and what they, if asked about specific, what they demonstratively know to be untrue. Man sings the praises. He is made to sing the praises of education because apparently that is the way to affect what I'm talking about. That we are not victims mentally of life-generated thoughts, that we can have a hand. We must have a hand in our own thinking, that is our own education. They turn thinking into education. That way, yes, some of us may be born under less intellectually conducive environment than others. But therefore, that does not mean that you must go around and just because you're born in a trailer park amidst, albeit family, but rather dense intellectual people, does not mean that you perforce must live out your life in that manner. You can get several jobs, you can apply for a scholarship and go to school and change the way in which you think, improve it, etc., which I repeat, it's not something to try and convince somebody, but there is simply no evidence. Because I'm being nice about it. It has no validity. But even ordinary people know that it has no evidence of success in the same way as the attempt to make people more civilized through punishment. The idea that people can be so-called criminal elements, uncivilized people can be rehabilitated. No. But ordinary people, the collective reality of life cannot operate on that basis or everything would stop. And so everyone sort of, figuratively speaking, holds their nose, hitches up their britches, and you press on. Knowing that what you're talking about bears almost no resemblance to what's going on. It is an unrecognized potential struggle with those involved in such as this between life-generated thought and some other potential variety. So let's just look at it simple for a minute. Overly simple, but simple enough. Then in this final, ultimate stage I was trying to depict here, the attempt, the struggle for enlightenment, the effort to learn the truth about life, comes about through this other potential above the internal line in your ordinary thought, some place that is now unaligned, some place that is untouched, self-generated thought. It is through its attempt to pull above the level of consciousness, pull it out of its natural environment, life-generated thought. God, I know I keep verbally whittling it down, trying not to overstep it, but me attempting to be subtle doesn't help much, does it? Let's assume that right now everyone interested in such as this has some ability to think outside the collective mind of man, to think somewhere. That at times you can have mental activity that is at least partially out of the grasp or partially beyond the veil of life-generated thought. Well, let's assume you can. Then what this struggle amounts to is that those kind of thoughts are trying to hook the shark That is what you normally think. And I repeat, it does not matter what you normally think. And you'll lay there forever on the deck of a ship, a little fishing boat, going nowhere. You'll make Hemingway's old man look like he had been out on a Carnival cruise. Because you will lay there forever if you think, well, it's just certain thoughts I've got to hook or deal with. May I put it to you this way? Bullshit. You are attempting without discrimination to fish for everything below the waterline. Everything in you that you ever think, you're attempting to kill it. You're attempting to pull it out of its natural environment. If you do not, nothing is possible. You can imagine otherwise, because we'll already assume, a safe assumption, that you already imagine that you might someday be more conscious, might become the ilk of a Buddha or a Muhammad or someone. So you already think that. You thought that before you ever heard me or anything. You already thought that. Don't you see? Don't you see? Makes you wonder where the new generation of philosophers after the demise of Leonard Skinner will be. Don't you see? Don't you see? Or is it Marshall Tucker? I don't know. At least it was a boogie band native to somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon line, mentally. You are attempting. That part of you, again, we'll assume that can, at times, have engaged in a neural activity that is far beyond any alignment with anything in life, that is not part of the life-induced thought. To do that, when you attempt to do it, you are attempting to pull ordinary thought in the same way that I say a man can overcome a shark, but only by getting the shark out of its natural environment is the only way it can be done. The only way you can handle the operations of the mind, the only way that you can handle what appears to be your consciousness now, which I'm specifying a bit more succinctly into the area of just thought, is to get thought out of its natural environment. Well, God damn, it took you long enough to get there. I didn't know you were in a hurry. So now the question is, well, what the hell does that mean? I'm glad I asked, because I'm going to tell you. You can certainly see in the first example, pretend I just turned back around and pointed my finger at the shark in the water. Your imagination's lagging, eh? Perhaps I should say your ability at controlled imagination. You can see that even before we took it to a metaphorical or symbolic level, that what I described was a statement of fact, that man, not based upon his strength, can overcome the king of one environment, the shark, the head of the hierarchy, the head of the physical food chain in the ocean. Man can overcome him, a much weaker man, just a man, but only by getting the shark out of its natural environment. That is the quirk. That is the minimal requirement to achieve this unnatural end. For a man to be able to do something with his consciousness. Now I repeat one more time, it does not matter what your consciousness is when you start. In other words, it does not matter the kinds of thoughts that dominate your mind. It is totally irrelevant, assuming you're just a sane, ordinary person. You have got to get them out of their natural environment. And his question, as smart aleck as it was, about, well, what the hell does it mean now that you've gotten that far? It does have a meaning. What would be pulling your thoughts? Just the thoughts that you have had all of your life. You're sane, ordinary, everyday, analytic, depth-defying. Work on that one. Insightful, intelligent, semi-intelligent, questioning, investigatory thoughts, which, again, I can only hope that given 20, 30, 50 years, that you've got some suspicion, when I point it out to you directly, that your thoughts have aided you somewhere this side of none in your attempt, is that you then have, perhaps then, somewhat of a more agreeable ear when you hear the idea that something must be done about the activity of your mind, your thinking. And I'm saying now what you have got to do, if you can hear any of this, which would show that you do have some ability to think above the waterline of life, outside of life-generated thoughts, then the question is, well, if I'm going to bring them under some control using your allegory, pretend I just turn that point again. Okay, I know you're lazy. Then you ask, well, how does that come into play? You can pull thoughts, life-generated thoughts, out of their natural environment in this manner. Do not let them rest in their natural environment, which is a land of preference, a land of pro and con. That all you got to do is think, you're doing this all the time. It just takes an extraordinary. It almost makes you spit every time you say something like extraordinary. Because it is extraordinary, but it sounds like, well, it's so otherworldly. It could not be less otherworldly. But it is so far removed from my present understanding. It could not be less farther removed. Because you're so much a part of it, it's like being in the middle of traffic again. And someone try to point out, boy, it's noisy out here. You go, what? The natural environment of thought, the natural environment of your shark, your useless, but the dominant level of your normal life-induced thinking, its natural environment is a land of preference, a land of pro or con, a land of true or false. But notice, it's its natural environment. That's the only way the mind operates. That's the only way thought survives in men, is that thought has to be cut. It does cut, and itself is cut. That what a man thinks is, at times, if it's through discussion or through reflection or through whatever cause, a man comes to periodic realizations that, especially what somebody else thought is wrong. Well, that idea that I just heard expressed, that's not correct. And at times, someone that passes for intelligent at sea level can even apparently reinvestigate or reconsider their own thinking. They can hear some new information or read a new book or hear a new lecture of some kind and go, I never thought about that particular thing in that particular way. And they can feel as though they are engaged in a remodeling of their own thinking. All of that is based upon, all of that is only possible as long as thought stays in its natural environment, which is a land of preference. That you cannot get your thoughts, and hence you cannot affect your consciousness as long as you take your thoughts as being worthy, as exemplifying some worthy preference or discrimination, which is, of course, insane from the ordinary level, because any sane view of the world of thought is that some thought is sane and some is not, or some thought is correct and some is not. And to say that it's all the same is insane. So there you are. Isn't it noisy out here? What? So it was that again. What? You have got to be able to pull thought out of its natural environment. And you may ask, how? How? Well, it's refusing to go along and trail along with your little lips wrapped around a love lock around the tailpipe of life-generated traffic that you're drug along, believing either that you're making some, or believing that you're making some proper decision about what you've just heard and are now thinking about, or about thoughts that are already passing through you. One of the great unrecognized aspects of life's talent to handle man mentally is, well, let's be a little more specific. One way that life keeps too many people from getting involved with such as this, to keep their interest at an agreeable level from its view, is by even a few people who believe they're interested in such as this, to in fact give out of the ordinary credit and weight to their thought processes. Not some form of questionable egotism. No, it's just a few people's would-be mystics, weekend dilettantes, it's a feeling after some length of time that sometimes it'll either come to them on their own, or else a few of them will be together in some sort of social group, and one of them will finally point out to one of the others about, you know, there's a lot more to you than most people realize, or there's a lot more to you than even I realized, or, you know, I don't give you the big head, but the longer I'm around you, I can see your consciousness, your comprehension of life beginning to blossom and increase more and more and more. And you think, well, how true? You know, I hate to say it. Or of course, if you're really good at it, if you're a real serious weekend warrior, you don't say anything, certainly. And you even seem to be surprised yourself at hearing this. Like, well, that could be true. I guess I have made such gains as to, and at such an unexpected rate, as to, in other words, I passed myself before I knew it. It is an absolutely delightful way that once you see it, it is just writ all over a large segment of the so-called, or the would-be, mystical community throughout the ages. Well, I don't know how to, I was going to say it's like another form of sham humility on a new sham level. It's a bit more witty, because anyone can walk down the street and you can see your ordinary routine sham humility. I mean, look upon the face of any priest or rabbi or politician during an election year, and you will see sham humility. I mean, it's just obvious as hell. And it's rather crude once you see it, and boring after you see it a few times. But it's sort of a bit wittier to see these would-be mystics. It's because they've upped the stakes just a subtle, meaningless little bit. At any rate. It is one of the ways that life keeps too many people from being involved with this, is to have a few people here and there to believe that their own thinking, not what I've just been saying for the last few minutes, that ordinary people cannot get anywhere. They're not supposed to get anywhere. That the only way that they can survive consciously, the only way that their mental life survives, is by a continual set of preferences. That is the nature of thought, and that's it. But the few people who believe they're interested in this, the little beautiful part to which I was giving life credit that it normally does not receive, is for a few people who believe they're interested in this. People wired up to have some intrigue there too, to feel as though their thinking has improved, that they believe themselves to be out, or they believe their understanding to surpass just the routine notions of education equaling understanding. That they realize it's not just a matter of the number of books I've read or the degrees I have, it's just the efforts I've been making. Read dreams, but the efforts I've been making all these years, that my own thought processes. I mean, sure, I'm not awake, I'm not enlightened perhaps, but my God, there is no doubt, looking back at the way in which my mind worked, the kinds of thoughts I had 20 years ago compared to what it is now. And this is all alone now, that you never say a word, you just sing it home alone. I mean, what better proof of your innate humility that you can do this alone? You don't need to do it, you sit there alone. And it seems to be a new, deeper seat of wisdom upon which you sit to make such reflections of your own somewhat surprising progress in the mental area. I've hit this several times. I don't know whether some of you consider you're too young, too old, or whether you always miss it. That is one of the dangers of taking any credit. That's one of the things I keep dragging out about age, which I don't really have anything to say specifically about age, other than if you get old enough you're going to die, but that's no secret. The rest of it, it is just part of the subtle trap. It's part of the subtle situation in which men are unknowingly trapped. It's for someone who believes that they're involved with such as this. And this can happen. I say weekend warriors. It doesn't mean just someone who does this part-time. This could be someone living in a secluded monastery, in a closed-in so-called mystical system, who has been there meditating, doing whatever they do, living in silence for many decades, that they sit around, that their life seems apparently fully devoted to the struggle, to the quest, that even they can sit there and be struck in silence. Not on the basis of routine shows of vanity, but in silence they're struck. That I still do not feel that I am awake. I do not know the meaning of true enlightenment, so therefore there's obviously more to experience than I have yet to taste, but that notwithstanding, what goes on in my mind, known only to me, but what goes on in my mind now, is of such a depth, is of such a gentility, is of such an insightful, tolerant nature, compared to what it was, well, say 20 years ago, that there hardly is any comparison. Well, hell no, there's no comparison. Now, it's easy enough to find in the ordinary world, but once someone believes they're involved with the quest itself, they continually, it's part of the way that you will keep you from ever moving, not this a plot, but as you take the wearing down of the body, you take the weariness, the natural weariness, the increasing weariness of the hormonal system, you take it as being an increase in wisdom. And there's no such thing. And yet you can't say that. There's no point to that with ordinary people, because ordinary civilized people, their response, even if they heard what I just said, they would still have a proper retort. Their retort would be, all right, you're saying I'm not as angry now and as judgmental as I used to be, or I'm saying I'm not, and you say that you will agree to that, and I go, yeah. And they go, and you're saying, no, it has nothing to do with an increase in my understanding, it just happens because I'm older, and I go, well, yeah, that's sort of what I was inferring. Still, from life's view, it would make the person say, well, so what? Aren't we all better off down that way? And the answer is yeah. But them individually? No. Because they do not understand anymore. If you do not individually, and do not do it when you can, and do not do it, I have yet to ever get into this, and I don't know whether we'll live long enough or whether any of you ever get to the point of needing it, but you have got to be able to, in a sense, I'm certainly not going into it, you have got to be able to overcome, not physically because you can't, but you have got to be able to counteract the natural weariness of the body, the wearing down of it. That is, I've been hiding it in news items and statements about you have got to keep up excitement. I slipped it in last week that there was supposedly two mystical schools, or a mystical school that said that it was almost impossible for anyone under the age of 20, no matter how excited, no matter how enthused they were when they heard about this, to ever understand at all what it's about. But also, it was almost impossible for anyone, even though it was more likely for someone, say over 50, to listen to it and go, yeah, and it's more likely they would understand it. They then not lack the enthusiasm. That's a very crude way of putting it, but I was trying to set up for some of this, which tonight was not the night, but here it is, I'm on it. In a sense, you have got to be able to overcome, not physically, because it's got nothing to do with becoming immortal, but you have got to be able to overcome the natural increased inertia, not just of the body, the wearing down of the body, but it drags the excitement of the mind with it. And you've got to be able to overcome it's not correct, I'm going to say it, counteract it, nah, reverse it, nah. You've got to be able to do something with it because you've got to take it into account. If you do not, you simply get tireder, wearier, and you take it as being, well, at least, I'm not the wise-ass young Turk, young blinded rebel that I was 30 years ago. At least, I may not be the level of Buddha, but at least I've improved over that. But hell yeah, from that sense, from that level, everybody that's 50 or 60 years old has improved over what they were when they were 20. If they didn't, we wouldn't have civilization. There would be nothing that would hold it together. You have got to pull your own, the life-generated thoughts in you, you have got to be able to pull them out of their natural environment. Same way as a man with a shark to overcome it. You have got to get your thoughts out of the place, their natural place, where they live and breathe like a shark in water. They live and breathe in a place where thoughts have preference, where thoughts are divided into good thoughts, bad thoughts, proper thoughts, improper thoughts, true thoughts. Thoughts are going somewhere, thoughts are not going anywhere. No thoughts going anywhere. It's going to swim around and around and around, just like a shark. And in a man, the life-generated thoughts, if you're a civilized, ordinary man, then, to some degree, the mind is the preeminent creature in you. Not that you do not, at the shark level, have fun. Not that the survival, physical instincts and enjoyments are not still excellent. But the more you are a civilized, up-to-date man, the more you are a mentally driven, oriented creature. But you have got to be able then to see, if you're ever going to get anywhere with this, that the very things that have made you what you are, the very thoughts that you have got to be dragged out of their environment. It's not that that one trick alone is suddenly going to snap you into Buddha land. But you cannot continue to take the thoughts that life generates in you as having any validity whatsoever, having any promise that they have, that there's any ability to shape, reshape, to mold and encourage. Can you put your hands down in the water and call over a shark and say, you would be much better off were you not so aggressive, were you not so hard-headed that you just run into boats and that you'll eat car batteries supposedly. If you would just slow down, I could help you. It's nothing to me, but I just so happens through evolution, I am, so to speak, no offense, but man is a superior creature, and you're going to put your hands in the environment of the shark. You understand the silliness of this, that in some way, that you're going to reach down or jump in with the shark and give him psychoanalysis or give him the benefit of your wisdom. If you put your hands down in the water with a shark, one thing's going to happen if he pays any attention. He's going to bite your hands. You cannot remold a shark. You cannot educate a shark. You cannot awaken a shark. You cannot change a shark. That is the same situation with a man and his thoughts. The thoughts that life generates in you might as well be a dumb ass, but hey, top of the line where it is, top of the line. A dumbass shark swimming with the same kind of intelligence. Except an ordinary mind says, nay, nay, is it supposed to? Because an ordinary mind, if it was listening to this, it would say, its reaction would be, well, you're saying that my thoughts, that everyone's thoughts, on this planet, the ordinary thoughts, have no more freedom, have no more understanding than a shark. That we have the same intelligence as a shark, simply at a different level. Yeah? Of course, by then they would have tuned me out. But that's it. But as long as you keep believing, otherwise, nothing can happen. You have got to pull ordinary life-produced, life-generated thoughts out of their natural environment. And the natural environment is a place where thoughts have any validity or lack thereof. That is their water. It is a binary environment. It is a place cut up into preference. Discrimination that thought is either true or false, or a little more true or a little less true, a little more acceptable, a little less acceptable. They're sharks. They're top of the line. They'll eat anything. That's why a man's mind it's the flexibility. They will eat anything less than they are, and everything in a man's mind is less than life-generated thoughts. The only exception, the whole point, the only reason that there's ever been a Buddha or a Zoroaster, the only reason there's any idea, any history, any reality to the idea of enlightenment is that a few people can get above that. They have the ability to get above, relatively speaking, life-generated thoughts and realize they're just sharks. It's not good or bad. They are what they are, but they cannot be changed. But that's not the end of it. It's not fatalism. It's not, well, what the hell? It's realizing that you can do something with them. But only, in the same way as my first stage of the story, it's only by getting them out of their natural environment. You cannot jump in and wrestle with them. You cannot jump in and try to reason with thoughts. You cannot jump in and try and turn a shark's head this way and say, wait a minute, let me show you another way to look at this, and I'm sure you'll see the validity of it. Not so. Or you got to pull them out of their environment. Put to you another way. You cannot leave thoughts where they are to do their job. You cannot listen to them at the level at which they normally operate without them doing you harm. Without them keeping you at their level. Nothing will ever change. You remember that mystical school that their slogan was, turn that damn radio off. Not change the station. Not, hey, listen to me. Turn that son of a bitch off. Huh?